I never imagined my life would turn upside down over a few numbers on a piece of paper. But that's exactly what happened. It was a Wednesday evening, just like any other. I had just come home from work, exhausted, my back aching from another long shift. The house smelled like leftover takeout, and the TV droned on in the background. My wife, Jessica, was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, as she always did. Jessica had always been obsessed with the lottery. Every week, without fail, she would buy tickets and swear that one day, she'd win big. I used to tease her about it. "It's a waste of money," I'd say. "Might as well burn it." She would roll her eyes. "And if I win, you'll be singing a different tune." That night, I was half listening as she checked the lottery numbers, absent-mindedly flipping through channels. Then, she screamed. A blood-curdling, high-pitched scream that made my heart stop. "What the hell?" I jumped from the couch, knocking over my drink. "Jess, what happened?" She was staring at her phone, shaking, her face pale. I won." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "What?" Her hands were trembling as she shoved the lottery ticket and her phone in my face. "I freaking won. Look." I squinted at the screen. The numbers on the TV matched the ones on her ticket. $9 million. My throat went dry. "No way." She grabbed the ticket back, holding it against her chest like a priceless artifact. "This isn't happening. This isn't real." But it was. The shock hit me all at once. For years, we had struggled, living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt, stressing over rent. We had been stuck in the same cycle, with no way out. But now, everything had changed. A grin spread across my face. "Jess, this is amazing. We're finally free. No more bills, no more stress." She wasn't smiling. Instead, she looked at me with something cold in her eyes. Something calculating. "No," she said slowly. "I'm free." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We're married. This money changes everything for us." She let out a sharp, almost amused laugh. "Oh, do we?" "Because as far as I remember, I bought this ticket. With my money." I blinked. "Jess, we've been together for years. Everything we have, we share." She smirked, standing up and stretching. "Well, maybe it's time we rethink that." My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. She was acting different. This wasn't the woman I had married. The Jessica I knew would have been jumping for joy with me, planning trips, talking about paying off our debts. But this Jessica looked like she had just been handed a golden ticket out of our marriage. She tossed her hair over her shoulder and walked toward the bedroom. "I need to think." "Think about what?" My voice was rising. She paused at the door and gave me a long, unreadable look. "About my future." Then, she shut the door. I stood there, heart pounding, mind racing. This wasn't just about money. This was about me. And I had a sinking feeling that my wife's newfound fortune had just made me disposable. For the next few days, Jessica was glued to her phone, making calls, texting people, and typing away on her laptop like she was plotting something big. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short and dismissive. I tried to ignore it. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. Winning $9 million overnight wasn't something you processed easily. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, a week later, she dropped the bombshell. It was a Friday evening. I came home from work, expecting to see her in her usual spot on the couch. Instead, I found her standing by the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice eerily calm. I froze. My gut twisted. "Okay, about what?" She took a deep breath, then exhaled like she had been rehearsing this moment. "I want a divorce." The words hit me like a truck. My ears rang. My vision blurred for a moment. I let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. "What?" Her face was stone cold. "I want a divorce." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but there was none. "You're serious?" My voice cracked. She nodded. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and winning the lottery made things clear for me." "Clear? Clear for who?" I took a step closer. "Jess, where is this coming from? We've been together for years. We built a life together." She sighed. looking at me like I was some obligation she had to deal with. That's just it. I don't want this life anymore. Anger bubbled in my chest. You mean you don't want me anymore? She didn't deny it. Instead, she pushed the papers toward me. I already spoke to a lawyer. The paperwork is ready. I'm offering you a clean split. I picked up the papers, my hands shaking as I skimmed through them. She was offering me nothing. Not a dime from the lottery. No share of the winnings. No financial support. Just nothing. I felt sick. You really think you can just cut me out of your life like this? Jessica folded her arms. I don't need your permission, Mark. I already filed. I clenched my jaw. So that's it? You win the lottery, and suddenly I'm disposable? She shrugged. I was going to leave eventually. The money just made it easier. I had never felt so betrayed in my life. I loved this woman. I had given her everything I had. And now, the second she had a way out, she didn't even hesitate to throw me away. I laughed bitterly. So, what now? You just kick me out and live your rich dream life? Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Guilt? No, she didn't feel guilty. She felt powerful. I already bought a new condo, she said, not even trying to hide her smugness. I'm moving out tomorrow. My heart slammed against my ribs. Tomorrow? She nodded. I hired movers. You should probably start packing, too. I shook my head in disbelief. You're unbelievable. She smiled. No, Mark. I'm just smart. I felt my fists clench at my sides, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She thought she had one. She thought she had everything figured out. But she had forgotten one very important detail. And soon enough, she was going to regret it. I barely slept that night. Jessica had made up her mind, and there was no reasoning with her. The woman I had spent years loving had turned into a stranger overnight. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, something nagged at me. She was acting too confident, too certain that she could just wipe me away like an old stain. That's when it hit me. The prenup. Years ago, when we first got married, Jessica had insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement. At the time, it didn't bother me. We were young, broke, and crazy in love. I didn't care about finances. I just wanted to spend my life with her. But now? Now, that little piece of paper could be my salvation. The next morning, while Jessica was out, celebrating her newfound freedom with friends, I went digging through our filing cabinet. And there it was. A neatly stapled stack of legal documents, tucked away beneath old tax returns. I skimmed through the pages, my heart pounding. Then, I found it. A single paragraph that changed everything. It stated that in the event of a divorce, any unexpected financial windfalls, such as lottery winnings, were to be considered joint marital property unless legally contested before the filing. Jessica had already filed, which meant I was legally entitled to half of her winnings, half of $9 million. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly as realization sank in. She thought she had one. She thought she had everything planned. But she had made one massive mistake. She forgot her own prenup. When Jessica returned later that evening, she barely acknowledged me as she strutted inside, a shopping bag in hand. "Did you start packing yet?" she asked, setting her bag down. I stood there, arms crossed. "Not yet." She rolled her eyes. "Mark, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I smirked. "Oh, I don't think it's going to be hard at all." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out the prenup and placed it on the table. Her eyes flicked down, and for the first time since this all started, I saw a crack in her confidence. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. I tapped the page. "You remember this little document, right? The one you made me sign all those years ago?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "So?" I leaned forward. "So, according to this, your lottery winnings are legally considered joint assets unless you contested it before filing for divorce." Silence. Pure, deafening silence. Jessica snatched the papers, skimming through them frantically. I saw the exact moment she found the clause. Her face paled. "No," she whispered. "This can't be right." I grinned. "Oh, but it is." She slammed the papers down. "That wasn't supposed to apply to the lottery." "Well, maybe you should have read it more carefully," I said, shrugging. Jessica's breathing turned shallow, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. You can't do this. Oh, I absolutely can. Panic flickered in her eyes. $9 million. And she was about to lose half of it. Jessica had spent the last few weeks treating me like garbage, tossing me aside the second she got her money. But now? Now, she realized her mistake, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Jessica stared at the prenup, as if willing the words to disappear. Her fingers gripped the edges of the paper so tightly that they crumpled. No, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. This isn't happening. Oh, it's very much happening, I said, crossing my arms. You were so eager to throw me out, Jess. But you forgot one small detail. You legally owe me half of that $9 million. Her eyes snapped up to me, fury replacing her initial panic. This isn't fair, Mark. That money is mine. I bought the ticket. I picked the numbers. You had nothing to do with it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, keeping my voice calm. You're right. I had nothing to do with the ticket, just like I had nothing to do with your decision to blindside me with a divorce. But the law doesn't care about what's fair. It cares about what's written in this contract. And by that logic, that money belongs to both of us. Jessica let out a bitter laugh. This is insane. You were fine without my money before. Why do you suddenly want it now? I raised an eyebrow. You mean before you threw me out like garbage? Before you made it clear that you didn't care what happened to me as long as you got to live your new, upgraded life? Yeah, things were different before. Her nostrils flared. You're a pathetic, greedy leech. I smirked. And you're a selfish, backstabbing liar. I guess we're even. Jessica let out an exasperated sigh, pacing the room. There has to be a way around this. A loophole. Something. I chuckled. Oh, trust me. I already checked. And guess what? You have two choices. Either we go to court and the judge enforces this prenup as it is, which means I get my half. Or we can settle this quietly, and you give me what I'm owed without a messy legal battle. Her face twisted in frustration. You don't deserve a cent of that money. I shrugged. Well, legally, I do. She turned away, gripping the back of a chair, her knuckles white. I could see her mind racing. She had thought she had one. Thought she had rid herself of me without consequence. But now? Now, she was realizing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. And I wasn't going to let her forget it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled sharply. Fine, she spat, whipping around to face me. You want money? You'll get your damn money. But I swear to God, once this is over, I never want to see your face again. I smiled, satisfaction washing over me. That, Jess, is the first thing we've agreed on in a long time. Jessica's hands trembled as she gripped the prenup. Her face had gone pale, her perfect, smug expression wiped away. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, she looked genuinely afraid. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her unravel. So, Jess, what's it going to be? Are we settling this like adults, or do we take it to court? Her nostrils flared. You think you're so clever, don't you? I shrugged. No, just prepared. Unlike you. She let out a bitter laugh. You're enjoying this. I tilted my head, pretending to think about it. Well, let's see. You blindsided me with divorce papers, kicked me out of my own house, and replaced me before I was even gone. So, yeah, I'd say watching you squirm is a nice little bonus. Jessica slammed the prenup down on the table. You want half my money? She hissed. Fine, I'll give you half. But don't think for a second that you're going to walk away from this unscathed. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what exactly are you planning, Jess? Going to hire a hitman? Smear my name in the press? Please, enlighten me. Her lips curled into a cruel smirk. I have connections. You think a judge is going to side with you? I can drag this out for years. I have lawyers who will eat you alive. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you can afford a cup of coffee. I chuckled, shaking my head. See, that's where you're wrong. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A few taps later, I placed it on the table and pressed play. Jessica's voice filled the room. I don't care about Mark. I just want his name off the house so I can move Chris in. Let him think it's a mutual decision for now. But once the money's in my account, he's gone. Her own words, caught in crystal clear clarity. Jessica's smirk disappeared. Her eyes widened in horror. You. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. Oops, I said, feigning innocence. I must have accidentally left my phone recording during one of your little conversations with your dear Chris. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's illegal. You can't. I leaned in, dropping my voice to a whisper. Oh, but I can. And guess what, Jess? If we go to court, this recording becomes evidence. Evidence that you plotted to deceive me, that you manipulated me into signing over the house while already planning to replace me. And trust me, no judge is going to look kindly on that. Jessica staggered back like she'd been physically struck. I smiled. So, let's go over your real options, shall we? She swallowed hard. 1. You drag this through court, and I make sure this recording sees the light of day. Publicly. Which means not only do you risk losing everything, but your little perfect life with Chris. Yeah, that crashes and burns too. Jessica's breathing was shallow, her nails digging into her palm. Or, I continued, option 2. You pay me what I'm owed, quietly. No lawsuits, no drawn-out battles. You transfer my share, and we go our separate ways. No scandals, no mess. Jessica's entire body tensed. I could see the gears turning in her head, desperately searching for a way out. I hate you, she whispered. I smirked. That makes 2 of us. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, through gritted teeth, Jessica said the words I had been waiting for. Fine. Jessica sat stiffly at the dining table, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. The room was tense, charged with the weight of everything that had just transpired. She knew she had been cornered. For the first time, I was the one holding the power, and she absolutely hated it. Fine, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Fine what? Jessica scowled. Fine, you'll get your money. I smirked. Now that's more like it. She gritted her teeth. But I'm not giving you half. That's ridiculous. I shrugged. It's what the prenup says. You signed it, remember? Her hands curled into fists on the table. You were never supposed to need it. So that was the truth, wasn't it? She had never thought that I would fight back. She had assumed I'd just roll over and let her take everything while she played happy family with Chris. She never expected me to outmaneuver her. I tapped my fingers on the table, pretending to think. All right, Jess, I'm a reasonable man. Maybe we can come to a compromise. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of compromise? Well, I could take half, which would be completely fair and legal. Or, we settle for 40%, and I agree to keep that little recording to myself. Her jaw clenched. You're blackmailing me? I smiled. Call it what you want, but let's be honest. You don't want this getting out. Jessica's breath hitched, her composure slipping even further. 30%. I shook my head. 40. And I don't want any delays. I want the money transferred within 48 hours. Jessica was shaking with fury now, her nails digging into the table's surface. You are such a bastard. Maybe, I said, standing up, but I'm a bastard who's walking away with millions. She glared at me, her mind still working overtime, probably trying to find a loophole, some way to still come out on top. But I knew she was out of moves. You have 24 hours to get the paperwork started, I said, grabbing my phone, or the recording finds its way to some very interested parties. Jessica let out a shaky breath. Get out. With pleasure. As I walked to the door, I couldn't resist one final jab. Oh, and Jess? Tell Chris I said hi. I didn't need to turn around to know she had thrown something at the wall in frustration. Jessica sat stiffly at the dining table, her manicured nails tapping against the surface in an erratic rhythm. Her face, usually composed and calculating, now looked anything but. She knew she was cornered. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I was the one holding all the power. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Fine what? Her nostrils flared. Fine, you'll get your money. I smirked. Now that's more like it. Jessica's hands curled into fists. But I'm not giving you half. That's ridiculous. I tilted my head. Is it? Because last I checked, your prenup, mind you, specifically stated that in the event of a divorce, the non-cheating spouse gets 50% of the other's winnings. She flinched. I had her. Jessica sucked in a breath and glared at me. You were never supposed to need it. So that was the truth, wasn't it? She had never thought that I would fight back. She assumed I'd roll over, sign whatever papers she shoved in my face, and let her waltz off with everything while she played happy family with Chris. I tapped my fingers on the table, pretending to consider her offer. All right, Jess, I'm a reasonable man. Maybe we can come to a compromise. Her narrowed eyes tracked my every movement. What kind of compromise? Well, I could take half, which would be completely fair and legal. Or, we settle for 40%, and I agree to keep that little recording to myself. Her breath hitched. Her face paled. You're blackmailing me? I smiled. Call it what you want, but let's be honest. You don't want this getting out. Jessica's hands trembled, her carefully constructed mask of confidence crumbling. 30%. I shook my head. 40. And I don't want any delays. I want the money transferred within 48 hours. She was shaking with rage now, her nails digging into the table's surface hard enough that I half expected wood to splinter. You are such a bastard. Maybe, I said, standing up, but I'm a bastard who's walking away with millions. Jessica's breaths came out shallow, like she was struggling to contain her fury. Her mind was working overtime, no doubt trying to find a loophole, some way to still come out on top. But she was out of moves. You have 24 hours to get the paperwork started, I said, grabbing my phone, or the recording finds its way to some very interested parties. Jessica let out a shaky breath. Get out. With pleasure. As I walked to the door, I couldn't resist one final jab. Oh, and Jess? Tell Chris I said hi. I didn't need to turn around to know she had thrown something at the wall in frustration. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Jessica, the paperwork is being processed. You'll have your money in 48 hours. A smirk tugged at my lips. She knew she had lost. No more smug looks, no more gloating. She had played dirty, and now she was paying the price. I decided to celebrate early. I walked into my lawyer's office, grinning as I shook his hand. You're a miracle worker, Mike. Mike chuckled. Nah, just good at my job. You gave me everything I needed. That recording? Gold. She would have been a fool to fight it in court. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. So what happens now? Now? Mike leaned back in his chair. Now, you wait. She'll pay up because she knows the alternative is much worse. I left his office, a new sense of freedom washing over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't under Jessica's control, and I wasn't the only one feeling the shift. Later that evening, I got a call from an unexpected source, Jessica's parents. Her mother's voice was sharp, accusing. What did you do? I raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Excuse me? You're ruining her life, she spat. She called us in tears, saying you blackmailed her for money. I chuckled. Oh, so now she's the victim? She made a mistake, but you didn't have to go this far. I scoffed. Funny, because when she was throwing me out of our house, trying to take everything I had, I don't remember you calling to check on me. There was silence. Then, a quieter voice, Jessica's father. Son, we just don't want this to turn ugly. I sighed, rubbing my temple. It's already ugly, Mr. Carter. Your daughter cheated, lied, and tried to screw me over. I gave her a chance to walk away clean, and she didn't take it. So now she has to live with the consequences. Another silence. Then, a defeated sigh. I see. Well, good luck to you. I hung up, shaking my head. Typical. When Jessica was on top, they cheered her on. But now that she was losing, suddenly, it was unfair. I had no sympathy. But just when I thought things were settling, I got an even bigger surprise. A message popped up from an unknown number. Unknown. Hey, we need to talk. It's about Jessica. I frowned. Who the hell? I muttered. Then I saw the name attached to the message. Chris. I grinned. This was going to be good. I stared at my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. Chris? What the hell did he want? A part of me wanted to ignore him, let him deal with Jessica's mess on his own. But curiosity got the best of me. Me? What do you want? The reply came almost instantly. Chris, meet me at Miller's Diner in an hour. It's important. I hesitated. Was this some kind of setup? A desperate attempt to get back at me? But then again, Chris had everything to lose right now. He'd been Jessica's little secret, the man she was willing to throw away her marriage for. And now? Now he was tangled in her downfall. I grabbed my keys and headed out. When I walked into the diner, Chris was already there, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. He looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, disheveled clothes, a man on the verge of cracking. I slid into the booth across from him. All right, talk. Chris sighed, rubbing his face. Look, man, I know I screwed up. I raised an eyebrow. Understatement of the year. He let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah, but I need you to know, I didn't know she was gonna do you that dirty. The whole kicking you out, taking your money thing? That was all her. I folded my arms. So what do you want, Chris? He exhaled sharply. She's broke. I blinked. What? She blew through most of the money already, he admitted. Bad investments, expensive vacations, luxury crap she didn't need. She thought the money would last forever. But now she's panicking. I leaned back, letting that sink in. Jessica had $9 million, and she had already run into financial trouble? Chris continued, his voice low. She's looking for someone to blame. And now that you're taking your cut, she's spiraling. She's talking about taking you down, any way she can. I smirked. Let her try. Chris shook his head. You don't get it. She's desperate. She's talking lawsuits, false accusations. Hell, she even mentioned hiring some guys to rough you up a little. My jaw clenched. Jessica was more unhinged than I thought. I narrowed my eyes at Chris. And why are you telling me this? He hesitated, then sighed. Because she's turning on me too. I almost laughed. Didn't see that coming? Chris scowled. I thought she actually cared about me. But the moment things got tough, she started blaming me for everything. Saying I was a distraction, that I led her astray. He ran a hand through his hair, looking miserable. She's dangerous, man. You need to watch your back. I stared at him, weighing my options. Chris was a snake, but he was also in a bad position. Jessica was unraveling, and if he was jumping ship, maybe he could be useful. I leaned forward. So what do you want, Chris? He swallowed hard. A deal. I raised an eyebrow. Go on. Chris hesitated, then said, I'll give you everything I have, texts, emails, proof that she's scheming. In exchange, I want protection. If she goes down, I don't want to go down with her. I smirked. So you want an escape plan? He nodded. Yeah. I tapped my fingers on the table, considering it. Chris was a snake, but a snake with information. And if Jessica was really about to go nuclear, I was going to be ready. I leaned back in my seat, watching Chris fidget across from me. He was sweating, nervous, desperate. You really think she'd throw you under the bus? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Chris let out a bitter laugh. She already has, man. She's telling her lawyer that I pressured her into spending so much, that I used her. He clenched his fists. She's trying to pin her financial ruin on me. I smirked. So now you want my help? He exhaled sharply. Look, I know I don't deserve it. I screwed up. I went along with her lies. But I didn't expect this. And let's be real. You want to see her fall just as much as I do. He wasn't wrong. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. You said you had proof? I asked. Chris pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages before sliding it across the table. Right here. Texts, voice memos, even a video of her admitting she wanted to drain you dry before dumping you. I picked up the phone and scanned through the messages. Jessica had been bragging about her plan. Jessica, I'll make sure he walks away with nothing. He'll be begging on the street when I'm done with him. Jessica, voice memo Chris, don't be stupid. He doesn't deserve a penny of this money. I did all the work. He was just some loser I kept around until I didn't need him anymore. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling up. I had known she was ruthless, but this was next-level evil. I played the video next. It was from a few weeks ago. Jessica, sitting on the couch, sipping champagne. Chris's voice could be heard off-screen, asking her why she was dragging out the divorce. "Because I want to see him suffer," she said with a smirk. "He thinks he's getting a fair split? Please. I'll spend every last cent before I let him touch a dime." My blood ran cold. Chris studied my face. "Believe me now?" I let out a slow breath. "Yeah, I do." He sighed. "So, do we have a deal?" I thought for a moment. Chris was still a backstabbing snake. But this was exactly what I needed to destroy Jessica completely. I slid his phone back to him. "Send me everything." Chris nodded, hitting the send button. My phone buzzed as the files came through. This was it. The final nail in Jessica's coffin. With the evidence Chris sent me, I had everything I needed. Jessica thought she had one. She had taken the money, the house, and my dignity, but she had forgotten one crucial thing. I knew her better than anyone, and I knew exactly how to bring her down. The courtroom showdown. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived. Jessica walked in with her expensive lawyer, her designer dress, and an air of arrogance. She barely even glanced at me, too busy whispering to her lawyer. I sat calmly with my attorney, waiting for my moment. The judge called us to order, and Jessica's lawyer started his argument. My client was the sole winner of the lottery. The funds are rightfully hers, and there is no legal obligation for her to split any of it with the petitioner. Jessica smirked, crossing her arms. My lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mrs. Parker engaged in fraudulent and deceptive behavior regarding these funds. We'd like to submit new evidence." The judge arched an eyebrow. "Proceed." I handed over the texts, voice memos, and video. The courtroom fell silent as the evidence played. Jessica's smug expression slowly morphed into one of horror. "Jessica, voice memo, I'll make sure he walks away with nothing. He'll be begging on the street when I'm done with him. Jessica, video, I'll spend every last cent before I let him touch a dime." The judge's face darkened. He turned to Jessica's lawyer. "Do you have any explanation for this?" Jessica's lawyer paled. "Your Honor, Enough," the judge interrupted. He turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Parker, this is damning evidence of malicious intent and financial misconduct. Not only will Mr. Parker be entitled to a fair share of the winnings, but your actions could be considered grounds for punitive damages." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, her mind scrambling for a way out. But, she stammered. The judge wasn't done. "Furthermore, given the financial records submitted, it's clear that you and your partner, Mr. Foster, engaged in reckless spending, depleting a significant portion of the winnings. You will be held solely responsible for these debts." Chris turned white as a ghost. Jessica looked ready to pass out. I sat back, a satisfied smirk on my face. I had one. In the end, Jessica lost everything. The judge awarded me a fair portion of what was left, enough to start over. She was left drowning in debt, her luxurious lifestyle shattered. Chris? He tried to disappear, but I heard he and Jessica had a massive fallout. Last I checked, they were both blaming each other for their downfall. As for me, I walked out of that courtroom a free man, richer in ways that had nothing to do with money. And when Jessica called me weeks later, begging for help, saying she had nothing left, I let it go to voicemail, because I was finally done with her, and it felt damn good.